I am exhausted. What a week. Hiya, I'm Hannah. You're welcome to my allotment again this week for another vlog. Let's see what I got up to, hey? Oh, I don't think I'll ever get all that wood chip off my sweater. Worth it. Right, so it's very sunny right now and quite warm in the greenhouse. It wasn't always this way. We've actually had some rain this week, which I'm so grateful for because it's been so dry. Still very cold at night. We're still having frosts every night here, I'd say. Maybe 1 or 2 nights where it wasn't frosty when I woke up. It's so cold, so yeah, I mean, I'm not used to April being this bad. But anyway, last vlog I talked about planting out the sweet peas and how that was some sort of block for me, right? And it really has been the catalyst when I finally decided on where the structure for the tomatoes were gonna go, because the sweet peas were gonna climb up there, right? When I finally decided on where they were gonna go, it was like everything else fell into place, and I just love that feeling. So I actually managed to plant out my regular peas. So I'd already planted out my tall ones, but I still had two types of Munch 2 peas, and a semi-dwarf and another dwarf as well to plant out. So it was 4 types of peas left. And they were, again, desperate to go out. So peas are more cold tolerant, so they could have gone out weeks ago. I just didn't know where to put them, right? But I finally managed to like just get my plan out of my head and onto the allotment. So yes, I'm happy. So the tall peas have got their structure built for them, and the Munch 2 that I grow are not as tall as them, but still they're gonna be over 5 foot, you know, so they still need a proper structure to climb up. So I like to grow them in a straight line, with netting hung up or with string tying them in. So I need some good stakes either side of the row of peas. So if I have 10 plants or 12 plants of one variety, I put a stake either end, and then I can have another variety on the other side and put a stake there. And then I'll just tie string. So you put the string maybe 15-20 centimeter apart, and you just tuck them in as they grow up, and they work quite well. There is less maintenance obviously if you string up some netting, but it's such a nightmare to get out at the end of the season, so I prefer not to do that, but we'll see how we get on this year. So I'm growing a yellow Munch 2 variety and a green Munch 2 variety, right? So the green one, Oregon Sugar Pod, it's quite difficult to find. So the problem with Munch 2 of course is that you can never find the peas pod before it swells. So you miss out on the crunchy Munch 2, right? So this year I decided to try the yellow Golden Sweet or something like that, yeah. And hopefully that one will be much easier to find, so I'm excited about that. And then I have a dwarf variety, which is my favorite one I grew last year in terms of just the sweetness of the pea. But it's only like 4 foot max, maybe more like 3 foot. So that one actually crops at a lower height than alderman, which is one of my heritage super tall peas, right? So that one grows much taller before it starts producing flowers. So I've put the dwarf pea in a row in front of the alderman, thinking that they will crop at the bottom and I'll still be able to reach all the alderman above. So we'll see it. I got the idea of Penny on Instagram, Plot and Pantry, I think her handle is. So I'm gonna try it this year and see how it works. And then I have the semi-dwarf Rosa Krone, which is a heritage pea variety from Sweden apparently that I've never heard of. But it has gorgeous flowers. So I planted them separately in a grid where my glass gem corn grew. So I haven't thought of the structure for them yet. They still grow, I think, to 4 or 5 foot, so they still need something to climb. But there's still time, and I'm gonna just brainstorm that a little bit and see where we end up. And then the sunflowers I showed you last week, that I sowed in modules, right? So the giant ones were already poking out the bottom, so I potted a lot of them up. I still need to do more, but yes, they're coming along now. And I already see the roots coming out at the bottom of these. So really, the sunflowers in their modules, I mean, you can direct sow sunflowers, right? But this size sunflower can be planted out. You obviously risk them being eaten by slugs or any weather or anything like that. But size-wise, they're fine for planting out. And then they're much more likely to get the best rooting structure down, and they'll be more secure, more stable. So really, if the temperature looks all right, I might consider planting these out instead of potting them on, and then I'll have some of each and we'll see what works best. But again, I'm not an expert on sunflowers. I struggle with them every year, though they're looking very good this year, I must say. So there's the Sansilla and another giant and another large. So we'll have a lot of giants this year, hopefully. So once the peas were in, I knew where I could plant out my spinach and my fennel, because both of them are a bit tricky to grow in spring for me anyway. It's they just rise to flower. They just bolt like almost immediately. So last year I had the ingenious idea of planting them in the shade of one side of the tall peas, and it worked quite well with the fennel, so I thought I'd pop in some spinach there as well and see how we get on. You don't want to put them in shade because they still need full sun to grow well, but it's just the peas run north to south, so the fennel will be on the east side of the peas, so we'll get some shade in the afternoon when the baking hot sun. So I'm hoping that will work again this year. Otherwise, fennel is best sown in after midsummer and grown into the colder months, because really bulb fennel is a winter veg in Italy, where it comes from. So it's a bit surprising, I think, to some people that we have them for harvesting in late spring, early summer. So really, they're best for swelling those bulbs, growing into the colder months instead. And the same with spinach. I have much more success sowing spinach in September for overwintering than I ever have growing it in spring, because it just bolts immediately. I maybe get 1 or 2 picks off the plants, but I'm hoping for better this year. If nothing changes, then I will not sow spinach in spring next year. This is what I've told myself the last few years, so we'll see if I can stick to that. So I've also managed to plant out my brassicas. I had some earlier sown there already in the beds, but these are my main lot of brassicas. So they include the kohlrabis, they're including the cabbages. I have 2 types of cabbages, and the cauliflower, more celeries, and then kaleets and broccoli. So I love the whole brassica family, but obviously they are large plants and I can't have the whole allotment full of them. So I had to be quite selective, and yeah, I did manage to fit quite a lot in though. Kohlrabis are smaller plants, so you can plant them a bit closer, which is a good thing. And I did get 3 cauliflowers in, and it's from a mixed lot of seeds, so it'll be interesting to see what we get. The kaleets, growing them in spring is just a trial for me. They might not work that well in growing in spring, but we'll see. And then the broccoli as well, I'm not so sure it will work growing in spring, because it'll run ahead, so we'll see. But the cabbages should be doing fine, and I've covered the whole bed in mesh, obviously, because pigeons are around already eating all my anything that's poking out. And I saw my first cabbage white butterfly flying around, so it's always good to be preventative and be ahead of the game this time of year, so you don't have any mishaps. So you might know I'm growing like tons of different tomatoes and even though I think I've killed a lot of them by sun scorching them, I still have a lot of other seedlings sown at a later date that are looking great, so I still need a lot of space for growing my tomatoes. So I had to put up a second structure, and which is a similar design as my first one. And I put that into place. I don't know what climbing plant to grow up them. I'm thinking I am growing cucamelons, but I'm also growing tall nasturtiums and morning glory, which is another climber, and there's more sweet peas coming. So I haven't decided on what's going to climb up those pillars yet. So yeah, you'll stay tuned on that. Maybe nasturtiums, that would be quite cool. But then where are the where are all the other climbers going to go? So yeah, I need to think about that a bit more. Oh, and while I have your attention, if you're finding this video helpful or entertaining, could you consider giving it a thumbs up, because it really helps telling me when I'm doing something good. Alright, back to the video. And I also finally got the last seed potatoes in. So these are the ones I'm growing in containers. It's my first year doing that, and I just used whatever broken containers that I had lying around the allotment, right? So there's a few bins with no bottoms and a few containers with holes, drainage holes in them, and yeah, I mean, it looks awful. That's the other thing. And you use so much compost. That's one of the negatives that I knew, but I hadn't really thought it through how much you actually use. Obviously, it's not gonna go wasted. I will be able to use it in my bokashi soil factories after harvest, because you can just reignite that spent soil. I think Katarina on Homegrown Garden, she stores her potatoes in that spent compost as well, so that's another use for it. So it's not like it goes to waste, but it's an investment when you plant them up, right? So in addition to the compost, I put in bloodfish and bone. I generally don't feed anything on my plot apart from the winter mulch that I put on, because it's enough to feed the soil. But because you're growing in containers, there's a limit to the amount of nutrients that's in there, so you need to add a feed to it. So this is the same with any pot grown flowers or vegetables that you grow. You need to add either water with a weak feed, or you can add in slow release fertilizer or something like that in the compost when you plant it up. And I have a massive tub of bloodfish and bone. I inherited quite a few things from our neighbours when they moved, and which was included some chicken manure pellets and a massive tub of mycorrhizal fungi, which I generally also don't use, but I'm using now on my flowers that I'm planting up in the flower bed, and then this bloodfish and bone. So it's good to get it used, right? They haven't popped up yet, but the first earlies that were planted in the bed, they are now up, and I'm trying to like cover them up because the nights are still so frosty, right? If we have another bad one, I might need to cover them with fleece because they're getting too big. I've been managing to like sort of half earth them up a little bit because they're poking up because they've been so small, but now they're too big really, and yeah, I might need to put fleece on. So I put the potatoes in their pots next to the asparagus bed. So the asparagus are starting to come up, but the grass there has been super lush growing next to it, because I guess I give them a good mulch every winter. So, you know, the grass, the couch grass next to my beds are all like, wow, it's amazing growing here, right? So I am slowly mulching all around them with cardboard. So I decided to do that now, and it was a good place to put my potato containers. So I've put cardboard down first and then the containers on top, and that will be my first stage of killing the weeds around there, the grass around there. And I'll obviously need to replenish that cardboard at some point when it's rotted away, but it's a good initial mulch to kill off that growth there. So in future I will have that grass free and just mulch it with wood chip every year, and just keep that as a space for the vegetables that I grow to root into, rather than the grass rooting into the bed, if you see what I mean. So it's like a no man's land where at least the vegetables have a chance to root in, rather than just this invasive grass being right next to them and stealing things from the bed, right? So because it's so cold at night, I've not been able to move my chilies, my aubergines, my peppers, and, you know, my tomatoes I told you about. But the dwarf tomatoes are out in the small greenhouse, and they're doing okay, though they're obviously not growing very much because the temperatures are so cold at night. They're surviving, but they're not thriving, right? So in desperate measures So I decided to bubble wrap the whole inside of the greenhouse. This is a tried and tested method, right? Though it probably works better if you have larger sheets of bubble wrap. Because yeah, I managed to finish it off, and I didn't move anything out. Just I wanted to see what the temperature difference was. But obviously when I came out, that was the night that the heavens opened up and it rained like crazy. So yeah, and when I came out, obviously all of it, almost all of it had fallen off. So the tape I used wasn't good enough, and I put it on Instagram, and people got me a tip. Yeah, so there are these clips, twisty clips. So that shape fits into the metal. I don't know if you can see that. There's a gap here in the metal. I don't know if you can see that. Where you can put it in like that, and then you twist it, and then it sits, and there's like a little ring to use with it as well. So that you can use that to hold the bubble wrap in place. So I'm going to use that instead, and that'll hopefully work a little bit better. So I haven't actually managed to test how big a difference the temperature it makes, but I think it will do quite well. And everyone keeps tipping me off of these you know, candles and upturned terracotta pots and using that as a heater, but I've actually managed to source a paraffin heater. So if it gets really bad, I'm going to use that, I think. Though it is quite a scary thing, isn't it? And it does smell. So I don't know, let me know if you've used them and if they work well for you. I wish I didn't have to use something that is using fossil fuel, because that just sort of defeats the whole purpose of growing your own a little bit. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll see if I actually light it or not. And yesterday I managed to get around to my summer fruiting raspberries. So I grow autumn fruiting as well, and I planted them up last year. They fruited excellently the first year, and the fruit is great, right? My summer fruiting, which I've had in the plot since 2018, they've never really established, and I don't know why. They're just not growing very well, and the bed is looking really sparse. So this year I have been putting it off and mulching them. That should have really been done in winter, but I was reading on the RHS website that says if growth is poor, then you can feed with chicken manure pellets. And I'm like, oh, but I have those, that's great. So I put both bloodfish and bone, because that's what they recommend anyway, and then if growth is poor, putting chicken manure pellets down. So I did that after weeding. Oh, weeding is so difficult in raspberries because the roots are so shallow. So you really have to be careful when you weed it. Always hand weed raspberries. There wasn't too much actually, because they're quite good at having a matting. You know, it's quite an invasive species, so they're pretty good at excluding other weeds. But yeah, there was some bindweed coming up, of course. But anyways, I mulched that on top of the feeds with compost, and it's looking so much better now. It's, you know, it's looking all neat and tidy. However, there's still quite a lot left to do in terms of the strawberries. They have not been mulched yet. My fruit trees have not been mulched yet. My poor fruit trees, they're not doing too well. Obviously, I dug up the apple and the pear from their growing spots, and they're doing much better. They're both in flower and they're looking gorgeous. They're in their little compost bags still, but I found pots to plant them in. So they are not cordon, they're column trees, right? So they're just straight up and they don't branch out. So I cut them back in a few vlogs back, and I think the pruning, they've responded really well to it. So I'm excited about that. However, I'm not overly optimistic because I've had flowers on them every year and fruit maybe like 1 pear and 2 apples. So I'm not super optimistic, but you know, they're looking better. They've never looked this good, and I've got pots ready for them to plant them up. I just need to pull my finger out. I do need help with it though, because they're in flower. It's like the worst time to repot them. Oh well, I should have done it sooner. Why didn't I do it sooner? Anyway, so yeah, I need to do that. So they're obviously grafted trees on uber dwarf stock to keep them small. So it's important when you repot plants like that are grafted not to plant them so the soil goes up above the graft, and you can tell that where the graft is because it's pretty obvious on the stem. So if you plant that below the soil, you might get shoots coming out from the rootstock, which is not the tree that you're wanting to grow from. You know, it's an apple tree or a pear tree or whatever, but it's a different variety than the one you're wanting to grow. So don't do that. Make sure that the graft is well above the ground and you won't have any problems. Otherwise, I really quite recommend growing column trees and cordon trees if you have a small garden. It's really, really good, and I'm looking forward to having these potted ones in our back garden. So you might have seen I did an advertisement with Hawes watering cans a while ago, and with that watering can you get this like little matchstick booklet of wildflower seeds. So I planted them up and they're coming up now. This is pretty exciting. So you have no idea what they are, but there's like several types of seeds on each of these plugs. So yeah, I thought that would be perfect for planting out in my my flower area. And then I did sow my straw flowers, right, and they are now coming up as well. So they need light to germinate, so they're all sprinkled on top here. And I've been worried that it's been too cold for them, because they really are, they're not that great with cold. But I'm happy and pleased to report that they're coming up now. Not as many as I would want, but I guess it's still early days, so. Yeah, so I took some strawberry runners, right? Oh, sorry. From my strawberry bed ages ago, and they've just sitting in a box over there with just their roots bare. I just water them sometimes, and I noticed that they start to flower, and I'm like, oh god, I need to do something with them. So I put 3 in this hanging basket at least, and I'm putting it inside my greenhouse. I'm hoping for early strawberries coming from these ones, though as they are fresh runners, they might need a year to establish first, but I thought it was worth a go. The other ones, I've got new, I've sourced new containers from my usual place, the Skip by my child's nursery. I found a few more containers, and I'm thinking some of them will be for dahlias and some of them will be for strawberries. So yeah, that's a few more projects to do. And I'm also pleased to report that we got quite a lot of true leaves now coming on the celery and the celeriac. So I lost a few because I forgot to water, and because they're in small modules and they're small seedlings, they sort of just bake, you know. And yeah, but I still have more, many more than I have space for in the beds. Yeah, so celery and celeriac and beans are 2 vegetables that I have forgotten that I'm growing and have forgotten to leave space for. So I'm still trying to work out that Tetris in my mind, which will be interesting. And speaking of beans, do you guys remember those beans, mystery beans I got given from my kids' nursery that they'd done like an experiment on? So they grew them either in soil or in cotton wool to see which one would root faster, and the ones in cotton wool did, and these are the ones. And it was way too early to grow beans, right? Beans are best sown in May, and because they can't stand frost. And you can see 5 out of 6 have had really bad frost damage, and I don't think, well, maybe this one will recover, but, and this one for some reason has not been touched by the frost. But this is why you don't sow beans until May, or even direct sow them in early June, right? Because they grow so fast, they will outgrow anything in your house super quick. And unless you can have a heated greenhouse, you know, they're going to be, and you can't plant them out anyway until after the last frost. So there's no point sowing them early, right? They're just going to be super massive and become a problem for you. So it's definitely not too late to grow beans. And on that note, coming up now, first weekend in May, a lot of sowing, and it's gonna be all the winter squash, and I'm super excited. So that will be in the next week's vlog. Anyway, have a good weekend, and yeah, I'll see you next one.